So we're on day 6 of Danny Johnson's War on Debt, and today we are going to talk about the most important part of this. And I can say that because Gary and I have always tithed since we got married, and we have been blessed in more ways than we can. If you do not know what tithing is, tithing it comes from the Bible, and it says that you give 10% of your earnings to the widow, the sick, the poor. And I can tell you that when Gary and I first got married, we were loaded in debt. I had just been divorced. He had been alone for 12 years. And he was working every overtime shift he could, and I was working 2 jobs. And we were tithing 2 or 3% at the time. And within 2 years, we were able to buy a house that we should have never been able to buy. And I believe it was completely because we started tithing and giving away to the poor. Um, I have always been brought up with my parents tithing. They had a separate account and they called it God's money. And we were raised that if I wanted a Christian book or if I wanted a Christian CD, I could go up to my dad and say, could I have God's money? And my parents chose to use that money to bring God into my life. That was what they thought. So this is how my parents did it. This is not how Danny Johnson says to do it, but I was taught that you do 10%. My parents always went to church. They are not saying that they did not give to the church. They gave every week. They helped pay the pastor and or priest in Catholic or Catholic, and do lights and all of that stuff. But they did not give their whole 10%. They had a separate checking account. It was labeled on the checkbook. I can remember my father putting God's money, and they would put their 10% in there. So when they went to church, they wrote the check out of that. My parents have been the greatest model of this. They have put roofs on people's houses that couldn't afford it. They have fed people. They have clothed people. Any person who they have come across that has needed it, they have done. They have helped their children. They have helped their grandchildren. That is how they have done it. When we started tithing, I chose to do it the way my parents did it. So just think, if you go to the grocery store and there's a kid and he's selling something, wouldn't it be nice that you wouldn't have to worry about where that $20 was coming to support a kid, and that you knew that you had this and it was God's money? Gary and I can do that all the time. We have helped people with food, with clothing. I knew a lady that her mom was ill and she needed to be able to fly to get to her. So we sent her a check and said, this isn't from us, it was from God. So we tithe 10%. And when we come across somebody, we tithe to them. And we give them God's money. And we get no recognition from this. The Bible says you reap what you sow. It was one of the biggest lessons that Danny Johnson taught me. Not that I didn't know tithing. Gary and I tithed before Danny Johnson. But when you reap what you sow, it makes so much sense, right? If you give out kindness, you receive kindness. If you help somebody in need, I can tell you we have been helped tenfold. Money seems to show up just when we need it from unexpected places, whether it's an overpayment on escrow or whatever the check might be. My mom and dad sending us a check for no reason but to help us out. Things like that. I highly suggest that you do this. And I'm going to tell you, if you listen to any great person that has money, Darren Hardy is another motivational millionaire, Eric Worre, Jim Roth, Oprah Winfrey. They may not call it tithing, but they will tell you to put 10% away. All of them say that. Darren Hardy says 10% to personal development, 10% to giving to the poor. You give what you have. If all of these great people are doing that, there's something to it. Tony Robbins will tell you to give. This is huge, and I ask you, if you don't have faith, to open up a Bible and look up tithing and read some scriptures before and after that word. You will be blessed. We are always blessed when we find somebody in need and we give it to them. I could not imagine, honestly, not putting my 10% away. And sometimes it sits there for months. I'm not saying that every month I somehow find it. We don't. Sometimes that money accumulates and accumulates and accumulates, and we help people. After we came back from Dani Johnson, I put on my vision board that I want to have enough tithes to bring a friend and her family to a First Steps to Success, a Dani Johnson seminar, and I want to be able to pay for it out of God's money. That is my goal, and I'm hoping to do that because if anybody needs God, it's this family. So that is my hope and that is my goal, and I believe that that will happen. And I tithe from our paychecks. I tithe from my home business. Any income that we bring in, I tithe 10% first thing before I even start my bills. It is huge. Dani Johnson will tell you it's huge. Start listening to other successful people. It is huge. I don't even know how to explain it if you're a non-believer. All I can do is tell you to try it. Try giving it away. And if you don't want to put it in a separate account like we do and you don't want to give it to a church, then find an organization. Dani Johnson runs one. It's called King's Ransom, and they help the poor. Give your 10% to them every month so you don't even think about it. There's St. Jude's Hospital. I mean, there are some great, Make-A-Wish Foundation. There are some great charities that we can participate. Find your local food pantry. Give it to them. And you will be blessed. You will be blessed. You reap what you sow, right? It is one of the greatest lessons my parents taught me. And when I met Gary, I was blessed that we started doing it. And I got to tell you, I'm not saying that there weren't times that I was blessed in my first marriage, but in my marriage with Gary, tenfold. It's just, God has blessed us in more ways than we can ever describe. And I have no doubt that part of it is because of this. So that is day 6. So when you're creating your budget, when you're trying to figure out your fat, please, please, please consider, don't forget, tithe your 10% and give to the poor, the needy, and the widow. Thanks, guys.